Oh, as a recovering lawyer, how you dream of taking the influential seat of an economist. Look, I want to start with a couple of words of a sort of introduction and conclusion almost, and then just make three really central points, because I think we've had some excellent discussion, and it'd be good to move on to some questions and conversation. I did want to thank the Australia Institute for co-convening this with Greenpeace. I wanted to thank the wonderful Sydney Democracy Network, which if you don't know about, make sure you have a look at, which is the Sydney University Institute of Democracy and Human Rights re-emerged and re-flourishing as this new Sydney Democracy Network, which I think is a terrific thing. And Greenpeace is very proud to be associated with John Keane, Professor John Keane, who's the head of the Democracy Network, to the extent that a network ever has a head, is with us. So. The non-hierarchical co-convener of the Sydney Democracy Network, John Keane, is with us. So John also wrote an absolutely marvellous piece in The Conversation last week about Sydney University's somewhat regrettable relationship with investment relationship with Whitehaven, which I'll touch on again in a moment. Do read that. I wanted to also acknowledge and thank Blair Palese, who's the CEO of 350 in Australia, for being in touch with Bill and arranging for that wonderful message. Blair's sitting up there, I'm sure would also be happy to have a chat afterwards. I think we really do look to 350 as one of the great global organisations that's taking on the coal industry wherever we find it, and it's always great to be in the trenches, the non-violent trenches, with our friends and colleagues at 350. I also just want to thank Jonathan for agreeing to chair, and for all the wonderful panellists. I want to take personal responsibility for the obvious failing of this panel, which is its gender imbalance. I have to say that when the list of invitations went out, the original list of invitations was perfectly balanced, but unfortunately our women invitees were more popular than our male invitees. And so we ended up with a rather different forum and an imbalanced panel, but I take responsibility for that, and I apologise because it's hardly acceptable in 2014. So those introductory matters. Tonight is really the sort of the second part of the cold dead hand contribution to the Sydney Democracy Network. The Sydney Democracy Festival. Because the first part was last week, when a number of Whitehaven miners came to Sydney University, put out their rig, put out their kit, pegged a section of the Sydney University grounds and started mining for coal in Sydney University grounds. Absolutely outrageous, absolutely disgusting. Of course, the good people of the Sydney University community were appalled when they passed by and noticed this outrage going on. It was, of course, in the end, not Whitehaven itself, but some fine activists from the Greenpeace activist community. But the reason why this outrageously wonderful activity took place is because this university, this wonderful, venerable, clever institution, has $1 million of its funds invested in this company, Whitehaven. Now, what does Whitehaven do? Well, it's a coal mining company. It does nothing else, as far as I know. It's constructing the largest coal mine currently under construction anywhere in Australia. It's a coal mine that's going ahead in the Laird State Forest, which includes areas of critically endangered box gum woodland. It's involving the destruction of numerous sites of significance to the Gomeroi people. There are around 30 vulnerable or threatened species that have habitat that's subject to this mine's footprint. It's been involved in various other public scandals, various ways over time, and yet this wonderful institution here, which has an ethical investment policy, which specifically refers to a whole range of relevant environmental grounds, retains a $1 million investment in this company. Now, that was part one of the same event that we are at tonight, in the sense that it was trying to draw attention to this perversion of a system. this perversion of a system that means that an institution like Sydney University has money invested in something as egregiously destructive and unsavoury as Whitehaven coal. So the three very straightforward summary points I want to make really. The first one is this. We bemoan the complexity of the issue of climate change. And I used to think to myself, how shall we resolve this terrible problem of climate change? And then a fellow by the name of Tom Burke sat me down in London. He's a bit of a sort of rumpole figure, if you can kind of imagine the sort of scene. Oh, very simple, David. Really, there are just two teams. There are the climate makers, that's the fossil fuel industry, and there are the rest of us. And if we boil it down to the climate makers and the rest of us, which as Tom calls are the climate takers, don't tell him, by the way, I referred to him as a rumpole-like figure because he's an influential character. If you boil it down to that, what you're left with is a very straightforward political contest. And it is that very straightforward political contest that we're here to talk about tonight. And lest you think it's just the people who've organised this event, well, we're not alone. Just today I got through the post, entirely coincidentally, from the Whitlam Institute, a report from Dr Kevin Taft, who's a senior political figure in Canada, called Fossil Fuels, Global Warming and Democracy, a report from a scene of the collision. And he begins his rather nice report with this statement: democracy is caught in a collision between two forces, the need to respond to global warming by cutting carbon emissions and the demands of the fossil fuel industry to increase carbon use and production. The climate makers against the climate takers in our country within a democratic context. So that's the first of my 3 points. It's really, in a sense, all very simple. It's that political context. So can we have that? In which case, I'm terribly sorry about that. I was looking out for a piece of paper I didn't see. Sorry, the second one is the problem of the law. The law is inadequate. It is currently legal to boil the world past 6 degrees. And the final, I'll ignore the final point because I'm sure it will come up in conversation. I mean, I'll simply conclude by saying coal is obviously a problem for democracy, but really the challenge before us is to ensure that democracy is a far bigger problem for coal. Thanks.